When reminiscing about the legendary ECW, many of the brand's former employees often look back with nostalgic joy, recounting the rush of adrenaline they got from rabid crowds and participating in matches and angles that would influence and revolutionize the business. It seems the legend of the violent creativity that was the Paul Heyman-led ECW grows with every passing year. Extreme Championship Wrestling did wonders for the careers of certain wrestlers. It revived and reinvented castaways like Steve Austin, Mick Foley and Terry Funk. It gave a platform to new performers like Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, one that would catapult them to mainstream success in larger promotions, and it made headliners out of overlooked and even underutilized stars like Raven, The Sandman and Sabu. But unfortunately, there are some wrestlers who don't look back so affectionately on their time in ECW, whether that was the original ECW or the one in 2006. I am Adam Nicholas, this is What Culture Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers who hated working for ECW. Number 10, Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler held a grudge against ECW when the promotion was first starting to make waves in the industry, largely due to fans crediting it and its wrestlers as the innovators of the hardcore style in professional wrestling. The King took grievance with this because he had regularly been putting on hardcore classics for decades in Memphis and elsewhere. Take his empty arena match with Terry Funk in 1981, or his match with Austin Idol in a steel cage in 1987, or maybe even his no DQ with Eddie Gilbert in 1988. But regardless of all of this, Lawler did actually agree to work for ECW in its 1990s prime for a short run at the request of the WWF, who had established a working arrangement with the brand. The King famously began calling ECW extremely crappy wrestling on episodes of Raw and began feuding with Paul Heyman and the rest of the ECW misfits. He would shock the Philadelphia crowd at ECW WrestlePalooza 1997 when the lights went out, and when they came back on, he was stood in the ring viciously insulting them as he, Rob Van Dam and Sabu beat down the locker room. Lawler has frequently spoken about his animosity towards ECW, recalling it was like these guys just came along and watched all of our old Memphis tapes and went out and did exactly what we did then and called it extreme. We were doing extreme wrestling matches in the Memphis territory before most of these guys were even born. And yes, to be fair, while there might be a sense of Jerry Lawler being an old man yelling at a cloud here, you can't see what he's talking about, although ECW was pretty damn awesome. Number 9, Taz. Taz regards his 7 years in ECW as the highlight of his career. I mean, how could he not? He became the human suplex machine, putting on stellar performances against the likes of Bam Bam Bigelow, Sabu and Tajiri, and even becoming an ECW Triple Crown champion too. Once he signed with WWE in the year 2000 though, he had a slightly less impressive run in the company. Mostly because Vince McMahon didn't see Taz as the human wrecking machine he'd been booked as in ECW, believing him to be too short to ever be more than a good hand. So in 2001, Taz shifted from wrestler to commentator in WWE, where he had a fantastic chemistry with Michael Cole on SmackDown for years. Eventually, WWE would resurrect ECW as their third brand in 2006, and, as we all know, it went disastrously. Everything fans loved about the original ECW was stripped away by the arrogance of Vince McMahon, and Taz was asked to do commentary for the show along with Joey Styles. Taz said, "I ended up leaving the SmackDown desk to do colour commentary on the rebirth of ECW. You see, us ECW guys, we call it the rebirth. We don't call it ECW. It was Joey Styles and I, and it was f***ing horrible." I mean, he hasn't really left much to the imagination there, has he? Number 8, mass transit. The mass transit incident is one that's not only notorious in ECW folklore, but in the whole of wrestling. It concerned Eric Koulas, who was a hopeful wrestler going under the ring name Mass Transit in an unhinged bus driver gimmick, who lied to ECW owner Paul Heyman about both his age and professional wrestling training in order to get a spot as a last-minute replacement at a house show match after Axl Rotten dropped out due to a family emergency. Devon Dudley and Mass Transit took on the Gangsters, New Jack and Mustafa Saeed. Mass Transit beforehand asked New Jack to blade him in the middle of the match. As you can imagine, New Jack had no issue with this. During the match though, New Jack beat Koulas senseless, attacking him with an array of weapons, and when it came time to blade him, he went far too deep. So deep, in fact, the two arteries in Koulas' head were split. He bled so extensively, he ended up blacking out. Koulas understandably looks back on his appearance in ECW with, to put it bluntly, appalling memories. He stated, "They savagely attacked me. They crucified me in front of 1,000 people." I mean, yes, this is all very bad indeed, but getting into business with New Jack in the first place wasn't the best move, and probably lying about your wrestling training and age didn't help either, really, did it? Number 7, Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle's first pro wrestling appearance, amazingly, happened in the hardcore haven of ECW back in October 1996. Angle had recently won his gold medal in the Olympics when fellow Pittsburgher and ECW performer Shane Douglas lured him to attend the ECW High Incident event in his hometown. Kurt participated in an in-ring interview and even provided commentary for a match. Awkwardly and somewhat regrettably though, this was the same event where the sorely controversial crucifixion angle took place. This didn't exactly sit well with Kurt, who had no inkling or tip-off that this was going to happen in the first place. As you can imagine, he was severely taken aback by the barbaric symbolism and flat out stated that he didn't want to be associated with it in any way, shape or form. He quickly hightailed it out of the arena, even threatening to sue Paul Heyman if he used any footage of his appearance on TV. Speaking of his ECW introduction, Angle said, "When Raven crucifixed Sandman up on the cross, I was like, I need to leave. And I talked to Paul Heyman and Paul said he didn't know about the crucifix under the ring. I knew he was BSing me." Paul Heyman being careful with the truth to get performers to do what he wants? Gah, you're out of your mind. Number 6. Batista and Big Show. When ECW was resurrected in 2006 as another WWE brand after the huge success of the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD and the 2 one-night stand events, it didn't take long for it to decrease in both quality and critical acclaim. It came nowhere close to the spirit of the original ECW and simply became a less entertaining Raw or SmackDown. To try and curb this, WWE had wrestlers from its other rosters headline episodes of the newly branded ECW like Ric Flair, Edge and Randy Orton in an attempt to try and boost the ratings on Sci-Fi. One of the most memorable episodes of that time being the August 1st, 2006 show from the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City. It was filled with fanatical hardcore fans who were quickly starting to hate the current product because, of course they were, it was nothing like the ECW they knew. Batista faced the Big Show for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship in the main event, and to say the fans didn't take it easy on them would be a drastic understatement. The crowd loudly chanted "Change the channel" and "Boring" chants as Batista and Big Show gradually lost their patience for real, grinning at and taunting fans in the hostile crowd and completely giving up on putting on anything that resembled a good match. But it seems despite losing their tempers on the night, Big Show does have a bit of regret when he talks about that evening. You really didn't have 2 original ECW guys in their house, and that's the worst feeling in the world when people start shitting on your match because you lost them somewhere during it. Back then I didn't know how to get them back. I was just like, oh crap, here we go, how much time do we have left? Can we just go home now? The 2 guys they want to see in that match is not Dave Batista and it's not me. Number 5. Mike Adamle. At the beginning of 2008, debuting at the Royal Rumble, Adamle began working for WWE as a backstage interviewer. He'd made a name for himself as a sports broadcaster, even hosting American Gladiators. And when WWE had showed interest in hiring him, Adamle jumped at the opportunity, but soon learned transitioning into working in the mad world of wrestling without being a fan of the product is a little bit of an arduous task. He would fumble over words and names when on camera, famously calling Jeff Hardy Jeff Harvey, and getting an avalanche of boos from the crowd in return. Things only got harder for Adamle when WWE made him a play-by-play commentator for ECW. Joey Styles, he was not, and even former ECW talent Paul Heyman and Lance Storm were critical of his work. In a worked shoot one episode, Vince McMahon on headset instructed Adamle to leave the broadcast booth suddenly in the middle of a show. And while that may have been a worked shoot, you'd have to believe that Adamle probably wanted to do exactly the same thing in real life, given just how critical the fans were and the amount of abuse he accrued online over his performances during that time. It's also worth noting here though that in 2017, Adamle was diagnosed with CTE-induced dementia, which would possibly explain his continued gaffes on both the mic and commentary, but still probably don't make up for all the hurtful things that he had to suffer during that time. Number 4. Mick Foley. Overall, Mick Foley looks back fondly on his time in the hardcore depths of ECW. But there was a period of time in the legendary wrestling icon's ECW run that he didn't overly enjoy. In fact, he despised it. While competing on an ECW show in the mid-90s, he noticed a fan in the audience holding up a Kane Dewey sign, a reference to Foley's newborn son, Dewey. It was only after talking it over with his wife that he comprehended how heinous of a sign it was, with his wife telling him, "I'm sorry, but I just got sick to my stomach." Foley's mental U-turn about the whole thing after those comments from his wife would actually be so intense that he would spit at that same fan the very next show that he wrestled on. It would also spur Foley on to lash out at ECW and their fans in his now celebrated Kane Dewey promo, making his real-life grievances known to the world as he intensely chastised the ECW faithful. Number 3. Jim Cornette. Longtime promoter, manager and all-round controversy haver in the pro wrestling industry, Jim Cornette is never one to shy away about his opinions and thoughts on the wrestling business. One particularly strong take of his was regarding ECW and how it was garbage wrestling for garbage fans. He once said of the hardcore energy fans adored, instead of hitting people with furniture, they were hitting furniture with people. So when he ended up making a one-time appearance for ECW in 1997, it was such a shock for the Philadelphia fans. He was tied into the Jerry Lawler invasion storyline, and when fans saw Cornette inside the ECW arena, they went absolutely berserk. Cornette drew huge heat in the building that night, with Lawler both representing the WWF. Cornette only agreed to it on the premise that Paul Heyman apologised to his friend Dennis Coralluzzo, who Heyman had screwed over with Shane Douglas throwing away the NWA Championship back in the day. Speaking about the ECW building, Jim Cornette said, "I've never been to a more disreputable location than that shithole bingo parlour," and following that up with a recent tweet about the angle saying, "The only real heels ECW ever had were me and Jerry Lawler, because the fans knew we really did hate that goofy shit." Number 2, Kurt Angle. Again, the Olympic gold medalist makes this list for the second time. He was drafted to the resurrected ECW brand in May 2006, but unfortunately it was short-lived, as Kurt was dealing with an excess of personal troubles at the time, a crippling dependence on prescription medication, a breaking down of his marriage, and his neck being in terrible condition, just to name a few. Other than a win over Randy Orton at One Night Stand, a match against ECW World Heavyweight Champion Rob Van Dam, and developing his wrestling machine gimmick further, Angle didn't really have many other highlights in his time spent on the third brand. Inevitably, Angle saw the whole thing as being a bit of a downgrade when he was drafted across to the third brand after coming from the highs of being a multiple-time champion on Raw and SmackDown. His last match for ECW was a match against Sabu in August of that year, and by that time, Angle had had enough. It had frustrated him to the point of asking for and being granted his release, and he would show up on TNA television just 1 month later. Speaking of his time spent in ECW in 2006, Angle said, "I was probably on the road over 300 days a year. I was getting injured quite a bit. I had a problem with painkillers, and when they brought me into ECW, I felt like it was a demotion. They didn't mean to, but they set that company up to fail, and it felt like I was part of it." I mean, I've got to be honest, Kurt, I think Vince might have set it up to fail, but hey, I'm a cynic. And number 1, with a bullet, Paul Heyman. The owner and creative genius of ECW would learn to truly loathe those 3 initials in 2006, when Vince McMahon would bring it back as a weekly TV program and placed Paul Heyman in charge as the booker. While he may have been the lead booker, Vince McMahon was of course the editor, painstakingly supervising and overseeing every single storyline, promotion and direction that Heyman tried to write. He would often have to strenuously fight and argue for his ideas, which famously included debuting CM Punk and having him be the face of the ECW brand moving forward. The program quickly became a severely watered down WWE version of the hardcore asylum it once gloriously was the decade prior, with Vince quickly injecting it with WWE-centric talent like Test, Hardcore Holly and Daivari. Ultimately, this would cause serious friction between Heyman and McMahon that erupted in a huge argument at the somewhat atrocious December to Dismember pay-per-view, with Paul Heyman being removed from his position less than 24 hours after the event finished. In the end, Heyman was actually thankful for being put out of his misery with Vince's mandate and not having to deal with the daily argumentative wars with the chairman. Looking back on his time with ECW in 2006, Heyman said, "To resurrect the brand in 2006 was an impossibility, because if you gave it a WWE sanitized spin, the audience would reject it. But you couldn't go back to what we were doing in the 90s because the culture had changed and the style was not applicable anymore." So yeah, sorry Kurt, but I think it might have been set up to fail. So there you have it, those are 10 wrestlers who hated working for ECW. Some notable inclusions there, but I'm sure there are ones we've probably missed. So let us know about those in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share, hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. You can find the original article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. You can also find What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE, or you can follow me on Twitter, if that's your thing, at It's Adam Nicholas. Or maybe you just want some more videos, which there should be after this one. I am Adam Nicholas, this is What Culture Wrestling, and we'll see you next time.